Welcome, everybody. Welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, produced by the Wadena County Historical Society and Travelin' Storyseller in collaboration with the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. BookEnds is made possible by the votes of Minnesota through a grant from the Five Wings Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. BookEnds programs from previous authors are now available on the website of the Wadena County Historical Society at www.wadenacountyhistory.org. Today's program will also be available on the website shortly. Next month, BookEnds will be held Saturday, May 13th, 2023 at 11:30, and will feature actor and improviser and author of the book Unscripted in a live performance at the Wadena Depot. This month, Sharon Chmielarz will talk about her most recent book of poetry, Duet in the Little Blue Church. If you have questions for today's author, feel free to enter them through chat. Now, let's welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, Sharon Chmielarz. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you, Shelley, and Lena, and the technician, and Wadena Historical Society, and Five Feathers. It's very nice of you to host these programs. I'm going to read 3 poems, and the first one is about Ukraine. The name of it is For the Millions Who Were Starved to Death in Ukraine. During the Holodomor, which was in 1932 to 33, and was a man-made famine. The man who made it was Stalin, who came from Soviet Union, which is today Russia. In the lands of etc. and the recurring et al., where genocides come and go, will be and have been, ordered on a timetable by the Emperor of Madness, a footpath through a field leads to the hollow where a body collapsed and its life passed, a life that in the afterwards continues in saved letters and rumors. And a man cannot endure this for a long time. There are 8 in our family. Have sent to Poland all the clothes we could sell for food. She ate her baby. He would have died anyway. The clothes chest empty, the grass picked clean, insects and birds long ago eaten. The present gives up some past. The present gives up some past. She can't shake it. This hour picked out like a dress that fits her, and she looks nice in it, or even very nice, as her husband might say. She's troweling into comfort soil, digging a hole for roots, the lilies she found growing in a ditch. She drove back with a spade for this bunch. The yards mapped out directions, tucked traffic noise away, the vehicular and emotional. The lily's yellow, a choice color, is a real flourish, as is her cat's sudden appearance from somewhere. The locust or scaly apple tree, the purple maple, the 3 elms, green-bearded lords at the border to the neighbor's apple orchard, the cat's fur, the leaves, warm, lit by sunlight's blur. Sounds rolling out the patio door, grocery sacks, rustling in the kitchen. Her husband, imagine she had a husband then, and he's returned. Anybody home? His former German accent barely detectable. Just wondering where everybody is. The cat's already racing up the deck steps. The woman pats the soil down around the lilies and waters them. Satisfied, she slaps loose soil from her hands and joins her 2 everybody home agains in the kitchen. elegy in a single bed. And I remember your shoulders, their strength then and their curves, your torso, its tautness, its funky sweat during love, your bare buttocks hard, and the back of your thighs. I remember your chest and abdomen and the points underneath. I remember with pleasure your weight against me, with my eyes closed. I remember, and all the feelings and pressure I've recorded, embedded in the skin of my fingers. Was I bamboozled? Isn't love everything? Shelley, shall we go on with
Okay.
some questions from chat? Nothing in the chat.
Not in the chat yet.
Pardon?
Nothing's in the chat yet.
Yeah.
So we're waiting.
Okay. This is the cover to my new book. It's in new and selected poems. And I don't know if you can see the church and the clouds, fields. And I want to tell you, how the cover, well, how the title came about. I was having some wine late afternoon at the happy hour with Pat Barone and Mary Kay Rummel. And I was telling them after 2 or 3 years of covering up my work with this book, that I decided on the name of the manuscript. And they said, what is it? And I said, Daughters and Fathers. And I didn't get any applause. There was no happy face. And finally, I think it was Mary Kay said, Daughters and Fathers. Well, you know, there's sons and daughters, sons and fathers, fathers and sons. I mean, it's kind of blah. But there were so many daughters with fathers in this book that I had a hard time letting go of it. So I went home and I thought, well, if I don't choose fathers and daughters, and I had this nifty photo all picked out. It was a city street and the roads, there were 2 roads and they just kind of, 2 streets, and they just came pretty close and then they veered apart. I thought that'd be a perfect photo for this Daughters and Fathers. So I went through the table of contents. I thought, okay, is there any title in that table of contents that I could use? And I came across this Duet in the Little Blue Church. So I thought, okay, that's going to be the name of the book, Duets in the Little Blue Church. And I've already had one negative content about it. A woman told me she opened the book and there wasn't a single duet in there. It was all words and no tunes. I let it roll. So I'm going to read you the poem 80, Duet in the Little Blue Church. Listening to him, you'd think we two sang the way the saved sing, making the connection between loss and love, holding its music, cracking stars, my dad's bass to my alto. Listening to him, you'd think sorrow our beacon, joy the rose, light over snow. You'd even think disappointment, sitting in the back pew, unfrozen from frowning, had opened its mouth as echo. And then the church itself, long time ago, I wrote this poem. like a church. And this is the church my dad went to, and is the church my grandparents on my dad's side went to. My maternal grandfather died before I was born. So this says, like a church on the North Sea, the Berlin Baptist stands on a hilltop, a spare, big-boned house looking over a sea of marsh and fields. The walls run a good fist thick against the tides of wind. 2 bars, gun barrel thin, prop up the window pane. Mullions square off the glass, and the theology of rods, they come from 4 directions at once to tame, bind, and confound the scope of the vision, as well as to divide the immensity of the great plains into parcels. Each pane a handspan wide. What light falls in remains, the messenger from heaven, underfoot among fixed benches. On Sunday, my grandfather comes to sing. Pumped music rolls just over the tops of high notes. His voice rolls like a breaker just under the crest, all the way down to the end of a song, and will not be rushed. In the pause between hymns, you can hear the wind, the sound of the farm, the people I come from, and its taste on the tongue is grit. Now, I think there was a question in the chat.
Actually, I got a couple of questions in my personal as well, and they're all very similar, talking about things like, where do you get your inspiration for your poetry? Do you write every day? Do you carry a poem around with you and work on it, or do you set time apart to sit down and write on it? How do you choose the form? So I guess if you want to speak a little bit, they're all basically asking about your methodology and process. So if you wanted to speak about that for a little bit, inspiration and such.
No little bird comes to whisper in my ear. I plunk my big rear end on a chair and just write. But something, whatever it might be a newspaper article, it might be a memory, it might be something I read in a book, it might be a word. Something has said, Sharon, go and write about this. So if that's inspiration, they come from all over. Inspiration does. But I don't, I taught for 30 years, so I'm used to getting up and going to work right away. So when I get up in the morning, I have breakfast and then I go to the work, my computer room. Usually what I work on is something I thought of the night before, or I jotted something. I have a bedside pad and I write on the dark in it. Sometimes I can't read it, but a lot of times I can. And I'll work on that. It might be something I jotted down on the newspaper the afternoon before, just a line or a word. It's a very unorganized thing. I mean, it doesn't come at 7:35 and it doesn't quit at 4:30. It just. So what were some of the other questions? But now I'm lazy, I must say that. I'm getting lazy in my old age because I've had this book published. And although my poetry group keeps me writing, because we meet once a month. I used to have 2 poetry groups. We met every week. That would keep me writing because the discipline, big on discipline. what were you going to say, Shelley?
Oh, I was gonna say, so when you choose the form, because I know like poetry comes in a lot of different forms, like rhyming and iambic pentameter, haiku, etc. Um, w- how does a poet decide which sort of form of poetry, or do you freestyle, or because it seems a little bit more than just writing a book where it's just words and they don't have to,
Right.
you
I
have more
like
words.
to use inside rhyme, and if
Hmm.
you looked at looked at a poem, you would see instances of that. But form comes when I write the thoughts. There's no form to it. I mean, it's just like a journal. I mean, a notebook. You got the lines going across. What I like about writing is that after I've written that, and I realize it's just a mess of glob, then I type it out, and then I see, oh, if I took that line and then put it down here, and if I took that over here, and then that, then I start, I've started to pull things together. And then when I type that out, then I say, oh, this needs to be 3 stanzas of 5 lines each, or couplets or triplets, or this needs to be a narrative poem or whatever. And I've read enough poems in the past to be able to pick out forms or try out forms from what I've just written on a blank sheet of paper. That's my favorite part of writing, to tell you the truth. When I get this glob of words, and then I have to make something out of it. And then that keeps going down, 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 refining, refining, refining.
Cool. And was poetry something that you always wanted to do? What brought you, because you said you were a teacher as well, what made poetry the thing that you chose?
Well, I came from a very non-literary background, okay? So I remember finding a book in my parents' basement, which had an earth floor, and there was a S encyclopedia, one book, the S's, and in it was stories and some poems. And I found a poem in there I really liked, The House by the Side of the Road. And then in high school, there were 2 poems in the literature book. One was by Keats, and that was way beyond me, but I liked the photograph beside the poem. And the other one was by, oh golly, guy with 3 names, just out of my head. And then I went to the university. I didn't run into any poems until my job was being discontinued. My teaching job, it was on the line. You know how school districts go through these public budget cuts. So I was teaching a non-essential. I was teaching German, and that was non-essential. So was art, music, and even Fayette. And so I thought I would go back to the university and pick up a degree in English, which is an essential. So I did. And if you pick up a degree in English, you have to take 15 credits in literature. And a lot of those 15 credits a lot of those courses came at 420. I could just get over there in time and then get my class over by 620. And it was in one of those 420 classes that I ran into poetry. And I thought it was just wonderful. I'd never heard of anything so beautiful. So then, of course, I wanted to write it too. And it looks so easy. You don't even have to fill a whole page. My goodness, who couldn't do that? So that's how I got started writing poetry.
Cool. I always found that poetry was a lot harder. I think because so many teachers don't teach it well. It took me a long time to like poetry because it was more like it was hard to understand sometimes what the poet was trying to say. And then the teacher would insist it meant something, and you're like, well, how did you know? Did you talk to the author? And so it wasn't until later that I started to really appreciate poetry. I think it's much harder to write smaller, like say more with less words. I mean, like a Stephen King novel that's like this thick, I think he could edit the heck out of those really, and still have it be great. I like the short stories better. But I think, yeah, it's much harder to write something small
Less is
and
more.
yes.
And you know what? What a poem means to me might not be the same as it means to you. And that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes a while to learn that as a kid, though, because you're just like, they're so sure that this is what it means, and you're like, are you sure?
Oh, yeah.
Some
Go ahead.
oh no, I'm sorry. There's like a little bit of a delay, so you can't tell if somebody's starting to speak. Someone asked how long it takes you to get a chapbook together.
Oh, it takes me a long time to do anything. And I work like that too. I mean, I've got kind of like a production line when I can go no farther in one manuscript, I'll just put it aside and work on another. So I have no idea how long it takes me to do a chapbook or how long it takes me to do a book. I really don't. On this book, Duet in the Little Blue Church, almost all of the poems were already written. And it took me 2 to 3 years to put it together. It was very hard to put. Well, I'm not crying on your shoulder, I hope. It's hard to select the poems that go into a new and selected. Really hard. Like I was looking for a poem in here about women who have had good and bad, I shouldn't put it that way, supporting and non-supporting fathers, okay? This woman, Artemisia Gentileschi, in the 1500s she was a painter, and she had a very supporting father, which was really unusual. And I looked for that poem just a couple of days ago, and I realized I didn't include it. And it was one of my favorite poems. Now what do? It's out, it's done. So you have to make some decisions. I don't know whether it was just a slip up on my part and I didn't include it, something else got into my mind, blah, 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 or whether I just forgot it. And so there's that.
Do you want to read a few more poems?
Hey, yes. Oh, I should, my maternal grandmother died when I was in the 3rd grade, and she lived in North Dakota, too far away for us to drive to. So I only saw her 2 or 3 times in my life. I really liked her, but because she gave me pennies. She would have a mustard jar, she'd fill it up with pennies, and then if I'd come, she'd give me the jar of pennies. Just sweet. Anyway, I'll read one poem to my other grandmother. And the one grandmother died when I was early 3rd grade. And the other grandmother I did not talk to because she did not know English. She did not read English, and she did not write in English or in German. So there was no little communication. The only thing I remember about her was going through the house saying, ay, 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 ay. You can't make a lot of poem about that. However, I heard this story about her, and I hope it's correct. During the blizzard, under the wagon bed sits a young woman, my grandmother to be, spending the winter. Cow chip and sod walls keep out the full blast of north wind. And tonight, as a mean band of snow hurls itself against my city's walls, the shadow of her small room darkens the fruit on my table. I think the immigrants came too late to avoid the winter, and they just had to spend it under the wagon until they could build something.
It's a wonder we're here sometimes.
Okay, I'll read a couple more poems then.
Sure.
This one is called Chance. Right at the worst time of your life, someone helps you in some way, and you have nothing in your heart to pay them back. You must take the least shred of it in, like some huge gulping machine. Say it was not human help, rather help from another creature, totally oblivious of you. An owl, say, a low call one evening from a winter bear tree. And that was enough to fill your ear before you slept. Say you were that desperate. How could you repay an owl that you'd overheard, busy being owl? But now you're better, stronger, a bit of the old toughness reigns inside again, though you want to keep that sharp awareness, pain left behind, because you feel you can never live, though you do live, without these ragged occasions some call chance. Well, changing the poem a little, tone a little bit. The poets double. The telephone rings. It's for the poet. Who's this? I ask. The New Yorker? You want her latest poem? She's flown the coop to escape the list, she said. Today, shopping, groceries and liquid plumber. We pour the plumber down, let it settle as we make supper, put away groceries, feed the cat, and change the bedding. By that time, we'll have eaten. The drain will be unclogged so we can do the washing. What? Yes, it's around the clock life. I keep orders so she can write. Lightning struck this morning. She said, I've got a paycheck for a heart, a wad of guilt in my frontal lobe, an obsession somewhere between Teresa of Avila's and Cinderella's. What we need, she shouted, is more Virginia Woolf. Who? I asked. And she burst into tears, wasting more of her writing time. I mean, if she really wanted to, she'd just sit down and get at it. After we finish the taxes, that is. We'll get a refund. We want the money. You say you pay for poems? I'm sorry she missed your call. She mumbled something about warmer parts as she stumbled out the door, which she didn't bother to close, wasting fuel. Well, we'll pay for it. I make sure. One of us always does. This is the house I grew up in. This poem is called Do Not Disturb. Do not disturb the sea in this house. Do not make waves by leaping to fear. Even awake like a muskrat's through reeds, upsets the house Neptune, the angry face behind trident and storm. Do not think less of yourself caged, longing like the shipwrecked for a shore. Even boats fail here. Their hulks quaver underwater among wrecks of armchairs, tables, beds, shadowed, stumps in channels of light. Now I'm going to read a follow-up poem on that to show you the difference in attitude. I mean, these are things I discovered from putting this book together, okay? To show the difference in attitude 6 or 7 decades can make. Yeah, only 6 or 7 decades. It's called Earthly Home. And I wrote it after the poem Adelstrup by Edward Thomas, a Welsh poet who died in 1917, just before the war was over. The First World War. Earthly home. Yes, I remember the garden, spaded by hand, seedlings started by hand, tomatoes and green peppers gorged on full sun, scenting rows familiar with hose and hoe. Before anyone else was awake, I was making my breakfast from a row of carrots. Beet leaves squatted in dew at my feet, the air savory from the volunteer Jill. August, a swatch of time, untidy, frilly, straggly vines and stems, plumped up crazy rich tomatoes, and on and over dirt footpaths, hungry potato bugs, a garter snake, and bees. Around the garden, a homemade fence. On the west, neighbor Molsted's yard. Past their apple tree and Railroad Avenue, then train wheel rumble and the Missouri's shadowed hills. So can you tell the difference there between the outlook? The one was inside the house, the other one was outside the house. And remembering something quite pleasant. I read another one. I've got plenty, believe me. 275 to choose from. This is kind of nice too. This is a nice poem. It's called Fisher's Club. And that is not far from St. Cloud. Some of you may have been there in the summertime. Maybe not. Fisher's Club, a roadside inn, lakeside dive, spiffed up, end of a summer day. And I suppose I should be smiling beneficently at the families playing near the shore, their plastic balls and splashes and chatter. But my eye pivots left to a couple. He is carrying her into the water. He's strong enough and she is light enough to be carried. I see how she holds her own, hugging his neck, his chest steady as his arms. I have never seen such a careful dunk, half dunk, as he gives her. That beautiful play he makes, lifting her from the water. And I suppose I should be admiring the sunset, all purple and orange and rose now. Nice porch here too, yeah, great view. But I have never seen such a loving as he gives her. Imagine being so light as to float above water in love.
So when you're
Hello?
going through all your poems, do you have them organized in such a way that it's easy to find? Because I know I've written some things and then I'm like, oh, I wonder where that is. And then I'll find it when I'm packing and organizing, and then I'll lose it again. And fortunately, I don't throw too much out, so I'll probably find it again, but it's probably not. But when you're trying to go through everything, and is there an organization that allows you to pull things up or find things?
Well, I've tried. I'm not very good at organizing files on my computer screen. I label them sometimes by year, and then I'm looking through the wrong year for something, and I really put it in a different file. It drives me nuts. So does the top of my desk. It's just usually a mess. And I clean it up, and I vow that I will never write another little stick it note on a card or anything. And then about a week later, the desk is full of them. Right. But in this, it helped because I just had the book, and I could, like, the first book was called Different Arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could just pull things from there. It was already put together for me. And table of contents are very nice. Very nice if I can use them, if I use them.
Yeah.
If I were really organized, I'd label the year, and then underneath the label, I would write every single friggin' poem, and then I would go, but I don't have that kind of time. All right. Any other questions?
Somebody was talking about publishing, like finding a publisher, and have you worked with different publishers? Were you fortunate enough to find one that stayed with you? How do you go about getting poetry published?
The first two books were published by New Rivers Press. That was the same publisher. They would only take 2 books. After that, you were on your own. But let me tell you that in those first 2 books, the first book, there were only 64 applicants for the prize. Today, it's like 1,064. That's the difference. And so that's kind of hard. For that, I really suggest people send out poems and check out if the magazine takes the poem, check out to see if they also do books. And if somebody will take one of your poems and then take another poem and then take another poem, maybe they will be interested in doing a book for you. But otherwise, I had New Rivers Press, and that was canceled. Then I wanted to get away from my dad so bad. I wrote a book about the other Mozart, and I found out I ran into another dad that was not too kind to his daughter. But I sent that out I sent out poems, and I got a lot of publications for the poems, but I sent it out. I thought this was in the days when women's studies were really big. So I thought, oh boy, this is going to be easy to get this published. It was not. I sent it out, I think, to 125 publishers.
Wow.
I wrote it down so that I wouldn't forget which publisher I'd already sent to. And I thought, oh, I was at the loft once in their library, and I picked up a magazine. The name has slipped my mind because I'm getting old. But anyway, oh, I see they've published poems and books. So I sent him about 5 poems. I got a letter back. He took every one of those poems. Click, 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 click. This is a guy to send the whole manuscript to. Then he died. So one publisher died on me. Then I had 2 books done by Loon Feather Press up here in Bemidji. I shouldn't say, I'm not up there, but Bemidji is. And that publisher died, Betty Rossi. Some of you may remember her. And then I had North Star Press, I think. And I had, oh golly. Well, the latest, I had Black, this is real, Bright Horse. Bright Horse took a couple manuscripts. And the latest 2 books were published by Noden Press here in Minneapolis. So that's how that publication went. What was the original question? Was that it? How
So it seems like it's a little bit more difficult to get poetry published.
Yeah, especially I think a book. It's really helpful to be, there's one thing about old age, you've been around publishers, and so you kind of know them, and they might remember you. And that's why I like my last name, Chmielarz, because if something comes across the desk, they might say, gee, where did, I think I've seen something from that odd name, however you pronounce it, anything. I wouldn't throw my husband under the train for it. I really wouldn't do that. Or my cat, or cats in the past. But I must say I have been keeping my eyes open for things like that.
Yeah, because it seems that books are a little easier, and that if you get with a publisher and your books are doing well, they'll a lot of times, especially if your editor stays with them, you stay with them. But it sounds like with poetry, it's a little bit harder.
Because you don't earn any money for the publisher. Any publisher that does poetry is doing it out of the kindness of her or him, his or their hearts. And they have other books they're going to sell, and that's going to take over what they don't get from poetry. This is true for the the New York and the Los Angeles publishers too.
So, but you're still, there's quite a few literary magazines, and also things like the New Yorker still takes poems, right? And I've seen poems, and
they pay for them. That is the absolute truth. But it's hard. They have their stable of writers that they cater to. And so if you've been published once in the New Yorker, they will be more prone to look at your next submission. But I don't even, I would go for smaller publishers. I really would. It's so much easier, and they'll turn you down too. But one thing you get a kind of hardened attitude. I do remember that when I was first publishing, I thought, I got so many rejects, and I thought, I'm no good. I'm never going to get published. They're never going to take a poem. And I even went to one, I've gone to a lot of workshops, but there's one workshop said, keep all your reject slips and just blast them on your walls like newspaper, like wallpaper. And then when you are published, you can laugh at them. And so I had a box underneath my desk where I did my work, my poetry work, and I would throw rejects in there. And it was a barbecue sauce box, with the flames on the sides. And I thought one day, Sharon, this is really masochistic. To keep that box of rejects under your desk, what kind of a vibe are you sending in your room? Throw the darn thing out. And I did. So you have to watch your inner feelings. Well, maybe that poem was not worth anything, but maybe the next one will be, But I do remember that hurt in the beginning. I'm no good. I'm no.
I think everybody walks around feeling they're not good enough.
Mhm.
And they're all convinced they're the only ones. Like, well, clearly everybody else is good, but I'm not.
Mhm.
And I think too that all writing is in a way subjective for both the writer and the reader. And so, who do you believe? The 10 people who love your poem or the one person who goes, ew?
Yeah, right. And
So
somebody else might take it and send it out to another place. I do keep a list of where I send poems.
yeah. All right. Well, did you want to read a couple more for us?
Okay, I will read a short one and an average sized one. Okay. The short one, I like this poem. Okay, we were talking about other people not liking this poem. I definitely wanted to include it because I like it. It's not based on anybody. It's just something that came into my mind. I call it a tone poem. A small repast of tea and kippers. One day I shall swim away like a herring, he said, and be eaten like a fish by death, she said. At high tide, she pours, he divides the fish. She asked what was that noise outside. He thought it a loose shingle, flapping. They both heard his belly growling. Later, the sea. Calmed down, murmured, she said. One day, I got a photo in my email from Joyce Sutphen. It was just a photo. And you know Joyce Sutphen, probably because she was a poet laureate before the current one, who is Westerman, Gwen Westerman. So this poem, the last one, is photo of a friend's marsh in winter. An uncut field of cattails in old bone yellow, born into growth as if patient in the cold. Maybe a representation of center stage, loneliness, a peculiar state of being, alive but not, dead but not, maybe a consideration of insular navigation, reeds without red-winged blackbirds. Enter stage left, a doe, ears alert, and her yearling, their part, a tentative stepping out, counterpart to motion. Hooves in snow, the foragers have arrived. Their time here will be brief. It's an age-old plot on earth to have little time to search and find before dusk falls.
Very nice. We have a question. When your poems are going to be published, I know with books, a lot of times they go through an editing process. Do poems go through that as well? And who does do they get suggestions and you edit, or somebody edits for you, or how does that work?
Depends on the publishing house. If they make enough money to have an editor, I mean, an editor for poems and not a copy editor. I think every publisher has a copy editor. Then you might have to change it, or you might have to be mad and say, I'm not changing this poem, even if you take it out. Or I guess those are the only two choices.
Yeah.
I do remember in the Mozart book, the editor said, I don't like 5 of these poems. And I liked all 5 of those poems. So I said, how about if we make a deal? take these 3 and I'll drop the other 2, you know? So, yeah, that happens.
They don't edit I mean, it just seems to me that poetry, a poet would spend so much time choosing every word because there are not that many of them to
Well,
say what they want.
what I did was choose 5 other poems that I thought, because he had a valid reason. It didn't quite fit, the ones he wanted out didn't quite fit the narrative, the scope of the poem or whatever, book.
Uh-huh.
So I sent him 5 more, or was it 3? I don't know. And he said, okay, I'll take those. But those that 2 of those that he did not like never did get in there. And I don't remember them. My heartbreak is over by now. I can't even remember what they were, but I do remember that situation. Yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions? You can add them in the chat or
Everybody
them.
that came, thank you very much.
Well, should we end with a poem and then we'll see if anybody comes up with we'll read another poem and then see if anybody comes up with any other questions?
Okay. I will read two short poems because we, got to watch the time here. I read you about the one that I picture on a sea. And I'm going to change the locale here drastically. This is called intersection number 6. We were at the intersection between Sodom and Gomorrah. We were at the interstice of knowing how far God would go. We were testing him to see how fast he'd race away from us, 0 to 60 in 20 seconds. How soon he'd freak out at our worst. Even as we knew he'd let at least one swallowtail escape, one transparent winged innocent elude damnation. He'd give it time to flutter away before he blew up the rest of us, sucked oranges. We who by nature will do anything to fly high. Here's another one from that book that I wrote about Genesis, reinterpreting the stories. I'm going to read you this short poem, and if Noah and the ark come to mind, you are right on tap. This is called Dove with Hint of Greenbacks. Toward evening, as on Fridays, when the heart sings and the eagle flies, a little note dangles from the dove's beak. Words in black ink run with the magic a bank can cash. Dear bird, I thrill, so relieved to hear of your nest. I think we have time to just read. Well, I'll read the short poem, and then I'll read, if there's time, I'll read another short poem. This poem is called Rabbit. I went out of my house to look at the moon hidden by trees, but under the trees, in shadow, in grass, I saw a small rabbit, like Durer's, the same throb in its throat. And here's another one, short one, called Where One Becomes Two. The old fox has died. Now his mate is alone. Now she must cross the river alone. Look, in the water, two foxes. Am I getting a duh, or you see the other reflection of the fox in the water?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Good. Well, Lena, do you want me to quit now, or is there something else that needs to be said?
Well, I was just wondering before you went, your poems are wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing them with us.
Yeah, keep
when
reading them.
you read, yeah. I was just wondering, who are some of the poets that you really like to read? Or do you have any favorites that you really enjoy?
Well, I'm kind of whorish about that. I enjoy just about anybody's. I don't like Adrienne Rich's poems, although recently I saw an Adrienne Rich poem and I thought, I like that. And there used to be a poem, he died, a poet, Charles somebody. I didn't like his poetry at all. And he was raved by everybody. Shar, thank you for all the comments. I have one more, but I don't know if, have we got 2 minutes? It will take me 2 minutes to read.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, we do. Read us out.
All right, I'll read you out. Reins, R-E-I-N-S. In the kitchen, that small space between porch door and oven, my mother stood behind me and braided my hair, a sun-bleached mane in her hands. 3 strands she wove over and under, a design twisting the future with the lost, her past, until 2 long ropes hung down my neck. On this dreamy morning, long after her funeral, my mother tugs left and right on my head, in no hurry, she nor I, to let go. Dang it, God, God, oh, I dislike that. You can't put emotion into what you read because it just throws everything off. She nor I, in no hurry to let go.
That was beautiful. All right. Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. There's a little bit of a delay, and then I start to say something, and then I see your mouth was moving and I don't hear something yet. And I was like, oops.
I was going to say, when my braids were cut off, they were pretty thick. My sister and my mother saved them. And so, about 30 years ago, my sister sent me those braids. And like me, the hair is changing and the braids are kind of a light brown now, but and kind of icky looking. Really, but anyway, that was a great piece of whatever. The book is Duet in the Little Blue Church. Thank you so much for hosting this, Lina, and everyone for coming, and Wadena Historical Society, and Shelley, and Five Feathers. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being a part of this. It's a really interesting program. I think we're getting more attention all the time because we have wonderful, wonderful speakers like you. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Yes.
It was
Yes,
great,
thank you
Sharon.
so much for joining us, and for all of you people, all of you folks who come and join us too, and make this a great program for all of our authors and poets and writers. So thank you very much. And hopefully we'll get a chance to meet everybody in person one of these days. We've had a lot of Zoom authors because of everything. So hopefully someday we can bring you all to Wadena to do a major book signing and meet everybody.
Yes, that's the plan.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. You guys have a great Easter for those of you who celebrate, and we'll see you next month.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.